The world tilted on its axis in the sterile, unforgiving corridor of a hospital. Isabella Croft, 6 months pregnant and clutching a future she thought was certain, saw it all crumble in a single, horrifying instant. Her husband, Julian, the man who had vowed to protect her, stood beside his impeccably dressed mistress, Chloe, his face a mask of cold indifference. As a wave of dizziness washed over her, the polished linoleum floor rushed up to meet her. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Julian turning away, his hand protectively on Chloe's arm. She was collapsing, and they were walking away. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated the man who received her one desperate phone call after she came to her father. And Arthur Sterling, the CEO who had built an empire from nothing, was about to teach his daughter's husband the true meaning of the word consequences. The antiseptic scent of the hospital always made Isabella's stomach churn. It was a smell of vulnerability, of life hanging precariously in the balance. Today, it felt like a premonition. She had come for a routine checkup, a simple glucose test, but an argument that had started in the car over a trivial expense had festered, following them into the hushed, busy hallways of the maternity ward. "I just don't understand why you need a $4,000 stroller, Izzy," Julian said, his voice a low, controlled hiss. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, a gesture that once soothed her, but now felt like a performance. "It's fiscally irresponsible." "It's the safest one on the market, Julian," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Hormones and a deep, unsettling feeling made her defensive. "Our son. I just want the best for him." "Our son will be fine with a perfectly adequate $1,000 stroller," he retorted, his eyes flicking to the nurse's station, as if to ensure no one was overhearing his lecture on frugality. This from a man who had bought a Patek Philippe watch last month because he was celebrating a new quarter. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. "This isn't about the stroller, is it? This is about control. You've been like this for months. Distant, critical." A flicker of something ugly crossed his face. "Maybe if you weren't so emotional all the time, I wouldn't have to be." The word struck her harder than a physical blow. Emotional. Unstable. He had been planting these seeds for weeks, subtle digs couched in concern. "I'm pregnant, Julian. I'm growing our child. Of course I'm emotional. There's a difference between emotional and hysterical," he snapped. That was when she saw her. A woman with sleek blonde hair and a sharp, tailored suit standing just down the hall, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. Chloe Vance, a junior VP from Julian's firm. Isabella had met her at a holiday party. Julian had introduced her as a real shark, a rising star. The way he looked at her then had made Isabella's skin crawl. The way he was looking at her now, a silent, impatient signal passing between them, confirmed everything. The world went silent. The beeping of monitors, the squeak of shoes, the low murmur of conversations, it all faded away. There was only the cold, hard certainty that crashed down on her. "She's here for you," Isabella whispered, the words barely audible. Julian's face went blank. "Don't be ridiculous. She is here for you. At my prenatal appointment." The absurdity of it, the sheer, brazen cruelty, stole her breath. "Who does that, Julian?" He took a step closer, grabbing her arm. "You're making a scene. Stop it. Let go of me." She tried to pull away, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Isabella, I'm warning you." "Or what? You'll tell everyone I'm hysterical?" The words came out louder now, laced with a pain so sharp it bordered on rage. "You brought your mistress to my OB-GYN appointment." His composure finally cracked. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, Julian's hand flew. The slap wasn't just a sound, it was a detonation. It echoed, sharp and ugly, silencing the corridor. The sting on her cheek was immediate, but the shock was a paralytic cold that spread through her veins. Her hand flew to her face, her eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't Julian. This couldn't be him. Is everything all right here? A calm, authoritative voice cut through the haze. Dr. Evans, her obstetrician, was standing in a nearby doorway, her face a mask of professional concern. But her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Julian's face paled. He dropped his hand as if burned. He looked from Dr. Evans to Isabella, then back to Chloe, who was now staring openly, her mask of nonchalance gone. Without another word, he turned and walked away, joining Chloe at the end of the hall before disappearing around the corner. He didn't look back. Isabella stood frozen, the imprint of his hand burning on her skin. The illusion of her marriage, her life, her future, hadn't just cracked. It had been pulverized into dust. Dr. Evans gently guided her into an examination room, her voice a soothing balm of clinical questions and quiet support. But Isabella's mind was a maelstrom. He left her. He struck her and left her. As a nurse checked her blood pressure, which was dangerously high, Isabella fumbled for her phone. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. She scrolled past Julian in her contacts, a name that now looked foreign and menacing. There was only one person who could anchor her in this storm. She pressed the call button. It rang once. "Isabella, is the checkup over? Everything okay?" The voice was deep, calm, and resonant with unwavering strength. It was the voice that had guided her entire life. She broke. A sob tore from her throat, raw and ragged. "Dad!" she choked out. "Dad, I need you!" Arthur Sterling was a man who operated on a plane of calculated precision. His world was one of billion-dollar mergers, hostile takeovers, and boardroom battles where a single misplaced word could cost fortunes. He was not a man given to panic, but the raw, shattered sound of his daughter's voice on the phone bypassed every layer of his legendary composure. It was a sound he hadn't heard since she was 6 years old and had fallen from a swing set. It was the sound of pure, undiluted fear. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm, even as he was already motioning for his executive assistant to clear his schedule for the rest of the eternity. "St. Catherine's Hospital, the maternity ward. I'm on my way. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up. True to his word, 14 minutes later, the doors to the maternity ward slid open, and Arthur Sterling entered. He was not a physically imposing man, but he possessed an aura of gravity that seemed to bend the space around him. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair cut with military precision, he moved with the quiet confidence of a predator. His eyes, the same piercing blue as Isabella's, scanned the area until they found her, sitting on an examination bed, looking small and fragile. He didn't say a word. He walked to her, gently took her face in his hands, and examined the red mark on her cheek, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He then enveloped her in a hug, not the gentle, comforting embrace of a typical father, but a solid, grounding hold that felt like a fortress wall. "He will pay for this," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a promise of revenge, it was a statement of fact, as certain as the sunrise. He handled everything with ruthless efficiency. He spoke briefly with Dr. Evans, his questions sharp and precise, obtaining a copy of the report documenting Isabella's elevated blood pressure and the visible mark on her face. He thanked the doctor for her intervention, a look passing between them that confirmed a shared understanding. Then he guided Isabella out of the hospital, shielding her from the curious glances of the staff, and into the silent, leather-clad interior of his waiting town car. The ride to his sprawling Manhattan penthouse was silent. Isabella stared out the window, the city lights a blur of indifferent colors. The home she had shared with Julian, a brownstone in the West Village, felt like enemy territory. Her father's home was the only sanctuary she had left. The penthouse was a testament to Arthur's personality, vast, minimalist, with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. It was a place of power and control. He led her to a guest suite that was larger than her first apartment, poured her a glass of water, and sat in an armchair opposite the bed where she perched. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Every comment, every withdrawal, every late night at the office." And so it all came pouring out. The little barbs about her spending, the suggestions that her pregnancy was making her irrational, the increasing number of business trips and late-night meetings, the way he had started locking his office at home. Piece by piece, the mosaic of Julian's betrayal took shape. It wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a calculated campaign. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression unchanging, but Isabella could see the cold fire building in his eyes. When she finished, exhausted and emotionally raw, he simply nodded. "Good," he said. "Now we know the terrain." He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his eldest son, Elias Sterling, Isabella's brother and a partner at one of the most formidable corporate law firms in New York. "Elias," Arthur said, his tone all business. "Change of plans. Meet me at the apartment. We have a family crisis. It involves Julian Croft." The second call was to a name Isabella didn't recognize. "Marcus, Arthur Sterling, I have a situation that requires your unique and immediate attention. Discretion is paramount. It concerns my son-in-law, Julian Croft." He hung up and looked at Isabella, his gaze softening for the first time. "You are a Sterling. You are my daughter. You are carrying my grandchild. You are not a victim, Isabella. You are the survivor of an attack, and we are now going on the offensive." He wanted a war. He just doesn't realize he declared it against the wrong empire. That night, for the first time in months, Isabella slept without fear, wrapped in the impenetrable safety of the Sterling fortress. She didn't know the specifics of her father's plan, but she knew the look in his eyes. It was the same look he got before a hostile takeover. Julian Croft had slapped the daughter of a king in his own kingdom, and the king was about to move his pieces onto the board. Within 24 hours, Arthur Sterling's penthouse had transformed into a command center. Elias, Isabella's older brother, arrived first. He shared their father's sharp intellect, but possessed a calmer, more methodical demeanor. He greeted Isabella with a fierce hug before his lawyer's mind took over, his laptop open and a notepad filling with an intricate web of questions. Soon after, Ava Ramirez arrived. She was a legend in New York family law, a petite woman with a reputation for being a tactical genius in the courtroom. Arthur had her on retainer for the Sterling Corporation's executive team, a preemptive measure for just this kind of messy, high-stakes divorce. "The hospital report is our cornerstone," Ava said, her voice crisp and clear. "Dr. Evans's testimony as a third-party professional witness is invaluable. We file for an emergency protective order first thing in the morning. He won't be able to come within 500 feet of you or this residence, but the true bombshell arrived in a discreet leather briefcase carried by Marcus Thorne. He was a former FBI agent who now ran the city's most exclusive private investigations firm. He looked more like a history professor than a PI, with his tweed jacket and thoughtful expression, but his eyes had a frighteningly analytical glint. "Mr. Sterling, Isabella," he began, placing a slim folder on the polished mahogany table. "Julian Croft has not been merely careless. He has been arrogant. He opened the folder. The first photos were what Isabella had expected, what she had dreaded. Julian and Chloe Vance, dining at intimate restaurants, kissing in the shadow of a downtown awning, entering a boutique hotel in Soho. The visual confirmation was still a gut punch, stealing the air from her lungs. Elias placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. But that was just the appetizer. The affair is the emotional core, Marcus continued. But the true threat lies in his financial and legal preparations. He laid out another set of documents. They were encrypted emails and text messages, retrieved by a cyber forensics expert on Marcus's team. As Ava and Elias read them, their expressions hardened. Julian had been methodically preparing to divorce Isabella for over 6 months. "He's been setting up a narrative," Ava murmured, pointing to a specific email chain between Julian and his own divorce attorney. "He's painting you as mentally unstable, Isabella. He's been documenting your emotional outbursts, twisting your valid pregnancy concerns into evidence of incipient paranoia." Isabella felt sick. "The stroller, the comments about me being hysterical." "Exactly," Elias confirmed, his voice tight with fury. He was building a case. His goal was clear. File for divorce shortly after the birth. Claim you were suffering from severe, debilitating postpartum psychosis, and petition for sole custody of your son. The sheer, diabolical cruelty of the plan was staggering. He wasn't just going to leave her. He was going to steal her child, using the very vulnerability of motherhood against her. But Marcus wasn't finished. It gets worse. The custody plan was to protect his primary asset, his money. He then revealed the true scope of Julian's deceit. For the past year, Julian, the celebrated founder of Croft Equity Partners, had been systematically defrauding his own investors. He had created a complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He was siphoning millions, skimming profits, and cooking the books to inflate the company's value while secretly bleeding it dry. He planned to drain the company, file for divorce, secure the child, and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty, Marcus concluded grimly. He was building a new life with Chloe Vance, funded by stolen money. The room was silent, the weight of the revelations pressing down on them. Julian wasn't just an adulterer, he was a sociopath, a meticulous, high-functioning predator who had viewed his wife and unborn child as obstacles to be managed and discarded. Suddenly, a small detail in Marcus's report caught Elias's eye. It was the name of the chief financial officer at Croft Equity, the one person who would have had the access and ability to help facilitate such a massive fraud. Eleanor Vance. "Vance?" Elias asked, looking at Marcus. "Any relation to Chloe Vance?" Marcus nodded slowly. "She's her aunt. It appears this was a family operation. The betrayal was now complete, a tapestry woven with threads of infidelity, gaslighting, and grand larceny. For a moment, Isabella felt like she was drowning. This man, this monster, was the father of her child. Then she felt her son kick, a small, insistent flutter from within. It was a reminder of what was at stake. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. It was about protecting the innocent life she was carrying. She looked up, meeting her father's gaze across the table. Her fear was still there, but now it was forged into something else, a cold, hard resolve. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. Arthur Sterling allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. He looked at the team he had assembled, the corporate lawyer, the family law gladiator, the FBI veteran. This was his world. This was his language. "We dismantle him," Arthur said simply. "We dismantle his company, his reputation, and his freedom. Ava, you secure Isabella and the child. Elias, you liaise with the SEC and the district attorney's office. Marcus, I want to know every dollar he's ever touched. We're not just filing for divorce, we're launching a multi-front war." He paused, his eyes locking with Isabella's. "He built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. It's time to pull the first one." The strategy Arthur Sterling devised was not a single arrow aimed at Julian's heart, but a volley launched simultaneously from 3 different directions, designed for total annihilation. He called it the Trident Offensive. The prongs were legal, financial, and reputational. Prong 1, the legal fortress, Ava Ramirez. Ava's first move was swift and decisive. Armed with Dr. Evans' sworn affidavit and photos of Isabella's bruised cheek, she secured an emergency ex parte order of protection. Julian was legally barred from contacting Isabella or coming near the Sterling penthouse. The order was served to him by a stone-faced process server at the entrance of his office building, a public humiliation that was only the first small tremor before the earthquake. Next, Ava prepared the divorce petition. It was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It didn't just cite irreconcilable differences, it laid out, in meticulous detail, a pattern of emotional abuse, conspiracy to commit parental kidnapping, and adultery, naming Chloe Vance as a co-conspirator. "We're not just asking for the divorce," Ava explained to Isabella in the quiet of the penthouse library. "We are petitioning for sole legal and physical custody, with no visitation for Julian, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. We are also filing a Ellis pendants against all known assets, effectively freezing his ability to move or sell anything of value. He's legally paralyzed." For Isabella, this was about protection. For Ava, it was about creating a legal cage from which Julian could not escape. Prong 2, the financial blitzkrieg, Elias Sterling and Marcus Thorne. While Ava built the cage, Elias and Marcus prepared to dismantle the empire. Elias, leveraging his firm's formidable reputation, arranged a clandestine meeting with the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. He didn't walk in with vague accusations. He walked in with Marcus Thorne's entire file, bank statements from offshore accounts, a detailed map of the shell corporations, and most damningly, a sworn statement from a key witness. Marcus had discovered that Eleanor Vance, the CFO and Chloe's aunt, had a massive gambling debt owed to a less than reputable casino in Atlantic City. He made a quiet approach. He didn't threaten, he offered a lifeline. He explained that a federal investigation was imminent. She could either go down as a co-conspirator, facing a decade in prison, or she could become a cooperating witness, the insider who broke the case open. He presented her with a choice between loyalty to her manipulative nephew-in-law and her own self-preservation. Faced with the ruin of her own life, Eleanor folded. She provided Marcus with a company laptop and server passwords, giving the team an unassailable digital trail of Julian's wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. "The feds are taking the case," Elias reported back to the war room. "They're building a sealed indictment. Warrants will be issued for all of Croft Equity's records. They're moving fast." Prong 3, the reputational collapse, Arthur Sterling. This was Arthur's domain. He understood that in his world, perception was reality. While the legal and criminal battles raged, he would ensure Julian's name became poison in the financial community. He made 3 quiet phone calls. The first was to the head of the largest pension fund that had invested with Croft Equity. The second was to a legendary, old money investor whose backing had given Julian his initial credibility. The third was to the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, a man he played golf with twice a year. To the investors, he didn't reveal the whole story. He simply said, "I'm calling as a courtesy. I've received some disturbing information regarding the fiduciary practices at Croft Equity. My family is divesting from any fund with exposure to them. I'd suggest you do your own due diligence and do it quickly. Coming from Arthur Sterling, this was not a suggestion. It was a 5-alarm fire bell. The hint of impropriety combined with the Sterling name pulling out would be enough to start a bank run. To the editor, he was even more circumspect. Keep an eye on a firm called Croft Equity Partners. I have a feeling a big story is about to break there. A story about greed, betrayal, and a spectacular fall from grace. He had baited the hook. The media, smelling blood in the water, would be ready to pounce the moment the first official news broke. In the penthouse, Isabella was a protected but active participant. She reviewed every legal document, her signature firm and clear. She provided Marcus with details of conversations, timelines, and Julian's habits that helped him build his case. The fear and shock were still there, but they were now channeled into a cold, focused anger. She was no longer just a victim of Julian's plot. She was an architect of his downfall. She was fighting for her son. "It's all in motion," Arthur said one evening, as the 3 prongs of the trident were poised to strike. "He thinks he is in control. He is about to learn he's been a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The week before the storm broke was an exercise in unnerving silence. For Julian Croft, it was the best week of his life. The restraining order was a nuisance, an annoyance he attributed to Isabella's hormonal breakdown, egged on by her overbearing father. His lawyer assured him it was temporary, that they would fight it in court and paint Isabella as the unstable one. He felt invincible. He and Chloe had moved into a suite at the Four Seasons, a temporary measure while he sorted things out. To him, this was the beginning of his real life. He'd successfully moved another $2 million to his Cayman account, the last major transfer, before he planned to dissolve the company and vanish. He'd even booked a celebratory trip to Chicago for the coming weekend, a first-class flight, a suite at the Peninsula, reservations at Alinea. It was a victory lap. He had no idea that every move he made was being watched. Marcus Thorne's team was a ghost, tracking his calls, his meetings, his every keystroke. They knew about the Chicago trip. They knew about the final wire transfer. Meanwhile, the whispers Arthur Sterling had started had become a low roar on Wall Street. The head of the pension fund quietly initiated a full audit of Croft Equity. The old money investor pulled his 8-figure investment, citing a shift in strategy. Other investors, noticing the 2 biggest players pulling back, began making their own nervous calls. Julian's phone started ringing more often. He dismissed it as market jitters, his arrogance a shield against the mounting evidence of his own implosion. The most critical piece of the puzzle was clicking into place inside the offices of Croft Equity. Eleanor Vance, the CFO, was a nervous wreck, but she followed Marcus's instructions to the letter. She copied server data to a thumbs drive. She flagged specific transactions for the coming federal audit. She played the part of the loyal, overworked executive, all while providing the government with the ammunition it needed to blow the company's doors off. She saw it as her only path to redemption, a way to mitigate the damage her weakness and greed had helped cause. In the Sterling penthouse, the atmosphere was one of tense anticipation. Isabella focused on her health and her baby. She practiced prenatal yoga, read books on motherhood, and worked with a therapist Ava had recommended. But beneath the calm surface, she was a coiled spring. She was waiting for the signal. The signal came on a Thursday afternoon. Elias received a call from his contact at the U.S. Attorney's office. "The indictment is sealed," the voice on the other end said. "Warrants will be executed tomorrow, Friday, at 10 a.m. sharp." Elias hung up and looked at his father and Ava. "It's time," Arthur nodded. He's scheduled to fly to Chicago with Chloe Vance tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Perfect, Ava said with a chilling smile. He'll be 800 miles away, completely isolated, when his world ends. He won't be able to interfere with the raid, shred documents, or intimidate employees. That evening, Isabella sat down at her laptop. Her hands were steady as she typed. It wasn't a long letter. It didn't contain accusations or rage. It was a simple, declarative statement. A death certificate for their marriage, and for the man she once knew. She saved it as a draft in her email, the recipient address, julian.croftequity.com. A bitter irony. The subject line was 2 words. Goodbye, Julian. She would hit send at exactly 10:01 a.m. the next morning. While federal agents were swarming his office and his life's work was being packed into evidence boxes, his phone would chime, and he would finally understand that he hadn't just lost his company or his freedom. He had lost everything. The air in the first-class cabin of the flight to Chicago was crisp and cool. Julian Croft settled into his plush leather seat, accepting a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. Beside him, Chloe Vance scrolled through her phone, a picture of effortless glamour. Julian felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Everything was falling into place. To us, he said, clinking his glass against hers. To the future. To the future, she echoed, her smile bright. She had no idea their future was about to be measured in years of litigation and federal indictments. She, like Julian, was blissfully, ignorantly triumphant. He saw the restraining order as a minor setback. In his mind, Isabella was a problem to be managed. Her father was a bully, but Arthur Sterling couldn't touch him. He was too smart, his financial dealings too labyrinthine. He believed he was a master of a universe of his own creation. As the plane ascended, banking over the sprawling New York City skyline, he felt like he was rising above all his problems, leaving the mess of his old life behind. He was untouchable. Back in New York, at 9:55 a.m., a fleet of black government sedans pulled up discreetly to the curb, a block away from the gleaming skyscraper that housed the offices of Croft Equity Partners. FBI agents, clad in dark suits, mingled with SEC investigators holding briefcases. They were a silent, disciplined army, waiting for the clock to strike 10. Inside the Sterling penthouse, Isabella sat with her father and Elias, a news channel playing silently on the large screen in front of them. She held her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the send button on her drafted email. The tension was thick enough to taste. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, the agents moved. They swarmed the lobby of the building, showing their warrants to the stunned security guards. They took control of the elevators, ascending to the 45th floor. Employees of Croft Equity looked up from their desks, confused, as 24 serious-faced men and women in suits entered their pristine offices and announced, "FBI, SEC, everyone step away from your computers. Do not touch anything." Simultaneously, across the city and in the Cayman Islands, court orders were being executed. Bank accounts were frozen. Safe deposit boxes were sealed. The intricate financial web Julian had spent years building was being severed at every node, all at once. The pension fund manager who had spoken to Arthur received an official notification of the federal raid. He immediately called an emergency board meeting. The old money investor saw the first news alert on his Bloomberg terminal. He started calling his contacts, confirming what Arthur had hinted at. The reputational collapse had begun. In Chicago, Julian and Chloe's plane touched down at O'Hare. As they taxied to the gate, Julian switched his phone off airplane mode. He was expecting a confirmation from his hotel, maybe an email from a client. At 10:01 a.m. New York time, Isabella took a deep breath and pressed send. The email arrived in Julian's inbox, just as a flurry of other notifications began to pour in. His phone buzzed incessantly, a frantic, angry vibration. News alerts from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Dozens of missed calls from his top partners. Panicked texts from his office manager. But the first one he opened was the one from Isabella. Subject, "Goodbye, Julian." The message was simple. By the time you read this, it will all be over. Your office is being raided. Your accounts are frozen. Everything you built on lies has been exposed. I know about the fraud. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about your plan to take our son. You didn't just betray me. You tried to erase me. You will never see me again. And you will never, ever be a father to my child. This is not the end of my story. It's the end of yours, Isabella. He stared at the phone, the words blurring. It didn't make sense. It was impossible. He tried to call his office. The line was dead. He tried to call his lawyer, who didn't pick up. He frantically searched for news, and there it was, the headline blazing across his screen. Croft Equity Partners raided by FBI in massive fraud investigation. His face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty grey mask of disbelief. Chloe looked at him, her smile faltering. "Julian, what is it? What's wrong?" He couldn't speak. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was a man in a first-class seat on a plane in a city 800 miles from home, watching his entire world burn down on the screen of his phone. The champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers, shattering on the floor, the sound lost in the triumphant roar of his own spectacular ruin. The fallout was swift and brutal. Julian Croft's name, once a symbol of audacious success on Wall Street, became a byword for disgrace. The media frenzy was relentless. Photos of FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence from his gleaming offices were on every news channel. Reporters swarmed his apartment building, the Four Seasons, and even his parents' quiet suburban home. Julian's arrest was a quiet, almost anticlimactic affair. 2 plainclothes detectives met him at the gate as he disembarked from the first flight back to New York. There was no struggle, no dramatic confrontation. He was a ghost, hollowed out by the shock of his sudden and total ruin. The photo of him in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of dazed despair, became the defining image of the scandal. Chloe Vance, stripped of her access to Julian's frozen accounts and facing her own potential indictment as a co-conspirator, folded immediately. Her lawyer cut a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for immunity, she would testify against Julian, corroborating the affair, his manipulative behavior, and what she knew of his financial crimes. Her loyalty, it turned out, was as transactional as everything else in Julian's life. In the war room, the atmosphere was one of grim satisfaction. The battle was won, but the cost was still being tallied. Isabella watched the news reports with a strange sense of detachment. The man on the screen was a stranger to her, a villain in a story she had somehow survived. Her focus was singular, the life growing inside her. The evidence against Julian was overwhelming. The documents from Eleanor Vance, the testimony from Chloe, the digital trail of wire transfers, and the mountain of evidence seized from his office painted an irrefutable picture of a massive, long-running fraud. His high-powered legal team advised him that a trial would be a public crucifixion, resulting in a sentence of 30 years to life. His only option was a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He agreed to cooperate in recovering the stolen funds from his offshore accounts. In the end, facing the combined might of the US government and the Sterling family, he accepted a sentence of 15 years in a federal prison, plus a lifetime of restitution payments to the investors he had defrauded. The family court proceedings were a mere formality. With Julian's felony conviction and the clear evidence of his abuse and manipulative intent, Ava Ramirez easily secured a final judgment. Isabella was granted sole legal and physical custody of their unborn child. Julian's parental rights were terminated. The judgment was absolute. He would have no claim, no contact, no rights whatsoever. The Sterling fortress had held. Months later, as the autumn leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold in Central Park, Isabella went into labor. Arthur and Elias were with her, a silent, steadfast presence in the hospital, a place that no longer held the ghosts of betrayal, but the promise of a new beginning. After 12 hours of labor, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She had expected a boy, but life, it seemed, was full of surprises. As the nurse placed the tiny, wailing infant in her arms, Isabella looked into her daughter's dark, curious eyes, and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it eclipsed all the pain and anger of the past year. "What's her name?" Arthur asked, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion as he looked at his first grandchild. Isabella smiled, tears of joy streaming down her face. She had thought of names for a son, strong, traditional names. But for this little girl, who represented so much more than just a new life, only one name felt right. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Hope Sterling. Hope." It was what Lily had given her. A reason to fight, a reason to rebuild, a reason to look forward. In the months that followed, Isabella blossomed into a confident and devoted mother. The trauma of Julian's betrayal had left scars, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of her own strength. With her father's guidance, she began to find a new purpose beyond motherhood. She saw how the legal system, with its costs and complexities, was often tilted against victims of domestic abuse, especially when financial control was used as a weapon. She had been lucky. She had Arthur Sterling in her corner. But what about the women who had no one? With a significant portion of her divorce settlement, the legitimate assets that were untainted by Julian's fraud, and a foundational grant from her father, she established a new organization, the Sterling Foundation for Family Justice. Its mission was to provide top-tier legal representation, financial counseling, and therapeutic support for victims of domestic abuse, particularly in high-conflict divorce and custody cases involving financial manipulation. She became its public face, its driving force. Her story, once a private horror, became a public testament to survival and empowerment. She was no longer Isabella Croft, the victim. She was Isabella Sterling, the advocate. Years passed. Lily grew into a bright, inquisitive, and happy child, secure in the love of her mother, her grandfather, and her uncle. She knew her father was a man named Julian, who had made very bad mistakes and was away in a place where he had to think about them. For a child, it was a simple, acceptable truth. Julian, meanwhile, was released from prison after serving 10 years of his 15-year sentence, his term reduced for good behavior, and his cooperation in recovering stolen funds. The man who walked out of the federal penitentiary was not the same one who had walked in. The arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a quiet, haunted humility. He had lost a decade of his life, his fortune, and his reputation. He had spent years in therapy, confronting the depths of his own narcissism and the wreckage he had caused. He moved to a small, nondescript apartment in Queens, taking a job in the back office of a logistics company, the only place that would hire a convicted felon with his notoriety. After a year of living a quiet, solitary life, he wrote a letter, not to Isabella, but to Arthur Sterling. It was a simple, handwritten note with none of his old manipulative flair. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He simply stated that he understood the gravity of his actions and that his greatest regret was the loss of his child. He asked for nothing but to convey to Arthur his profound and unending remorse. Arthur, to Isabella's surprise, showed her the letter. "People can change, Izzy," he said quietly, "but trust must be earned, not given." Isabella was torn. The protective mother in her wanted to keep Lily 1,000 miles away from the man who had tried to steal her. But she also saw her daughter starting to ask more questions, to look at other children with their fathers with a wistful curiosity. She agreed to a meeting. It took place in a neutral location, the office of a family therapist. Julian looked older, grayer. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a simple shirt and slacks. When he saw Isabella, he flinched, as if expecting a blow. "I don't want anything from you, Isabella," he said, his voice raspy. "I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I want you to know that I am sorry. For everything." He then explained that he had been putting aside a small portion of his meager salary every month into a trust fund for Lily. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. This was the beginning of a long, slow, and fragile process. It started with him writing letters to Lily, which Isabella would read to her. Then came supervised visits at a therapeutic center, with a counselor present at all times. Julian never overstepped. He was gentle, patient, and seemed content just to be in his daughter's presence, answering her questions honestly but age-appropriately. He was building a fragile bridge, stone by painstaking stone, across the chasm of his own creation. 5 years later, the bridge was still standing. The visits had moved from the therapist's office to a public park, and then to short, supervised outings for ice cream. Julian was a consistent, quiet presence in the periphery of Lily's life. He would never be her primary parent, but he was becoming her father. Isabella watched this evolution with a complex mix of emotions. The old anger had faded, replaced by a wary but growing respect for the effort Julian was making. She saw that his redemption wasn't a performance. It was a quiet, daily commitment. Her own life was full and rewarding. The Sterling Foundation had become a national force for change, helping thousands of women and children escape abusive situations. She had found a new kind of love, not in a romantic partner, but in her work, her family, and her daughter. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Isabella stood on the sidelines of a soccer field in Central Park, watching Lily's team play. Lily, now a spirited 10-year-old, scored a goal, and her face lit up with pure joy. She looked to the sidelines, and her eyes found her mother's. Isabella cheered, her heart swelling with pride. Then, Lily's gaze shifted to a spot a little further down the line, where a man stood by himself, leaning against a tree. It was Julian. He wasn't allowed on the main sidelines with the other parents, a boundary they had all agreed upon. But he came to every game. He watched from a distance, and after it was over, he would give Lily a high five and tell her she played a great game before quietly leaving. Lily waved at him, and he waved back, a small, genuine smile on his face. In that moment, Isabella saw the full picture of her life. It wasn't the life she had once imagined, but it was real, and it was hers. The betrayal, the fight, the collapse. It had all led here, to this soccer field, where a mother and a father, no longer partners but bound forever by their love for their child, could watch their daughter score a goal, their shared past, a healed scar, rather than a gaping wound. Arthur Sterling stood beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Izzy," he said, not looking at Julian, but at the radiant smile on his granddaughter's face. "You built something better." Isabella nodded, a sense of profound and lasting peace settling over her. The storm was over. She had survived, she had fought, and she had won. Not just for herself, but for Lily. And in the quiet afternoon light, that felt like the greatest victory of all. Isabella's journey from a devastating betrayal to a life of purpose and peace is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can often become our greatest strengths. She didn't just survive. She rebuilt her world and dedicated her life to helping others rebuild theirs. What did you think of Arthur Sterling's decisive actions? Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive a betrayal like Julian's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life dramas. What happens when a waitress drowning in debt and invisible to the world comes face to face with a billionaire's fury? We're not talking about a simple complaint. We're talking about a storm of power and rage, so intense it silences a 5-star London restaurant. He's a man who can buy and sell entire city blocks, and he's about to ruin lives over a single mistake. He's already on his feet, his bodyguards moving in the end of a career for the terrified manager. But then the waitress does something impossible. She speaks 4 words. 4 words in a language no one expects, in a dialect so specific and personal, it stops the billionaire dead in his tracks. This isn't a story about good service. It's about a secret that connects 2 worlds and a single sentence that changes everything. The Heir in the Gilded Lyre. A bastion of old money and new power nestled in the heart of Mayfair, was usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet confidence. Tonight, however, it was sharp with the metallic tang of fear. The source of this disturbance was a man at table 7, the most coveted alcove in the restaurant, a man whose presence usually guaranteed a level of hushed reverence, usually reserved for royalty. Khalid al-Jamil was not a king, but he was close. A Saudi construction and technology magnate, his net worth was a matter of public speculation and private awe. His face, usually a stoic mask of handsome, sun-weathered features, was currently a thundercloud of raw fury. His dark eyes, which had appraised multi-billion-dollar energy contracts with unnerving calm just that morning, were now fixed on the trembling restaurant manager, Mr. Davies. Incompetence. Khalid's voice was low, yet it cut through the muted clinking of cutlery across the entire dining room. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience, a voice that didn't need to be raised to command a legion. I do not tolerate incompetence. Not in my boardroom, and certainly not when I am paying a small fortune for a piece of fish. The offending item lay on a pristine white plate, a Dover sole filleted tableside. The supposed error, a minuscule bone no larger than an eyelash, had been spotted by one of his 2 ever-present aides. For anyone else, it would be an oversight. For Khalid al-Jamil, on this particular day, it was a profound insult. It was the final crack in a dam that had been straining to hold back a flood of frustration all week. A colossal green energy deal, the legacy project of his career, had just imploded that afternoon, due to a betrayal he was still struggling to process. The bone was not the reason for his anger. It was merely the target. Mr. Davies, a man who had placated ambassadors and Hollywood stars, was visibly sweating. Mr. Al-Jamil, I am profoundly sorry. It is an inexcusable lapse. Please allow us to remake the entire meal for you and your party. Of course, there will be no charge. No charge. Khalid let out a short, incredulous laugh that was devoid of any humor. Do you think this is about money? Do you have any idea who I am? He pushed his chair back, the the sound scraping harshly against the marble floor. The entire restaurant flinched. His 2 bodyguards, monolithic men in tailored suits, moved with fluid precision, one stepping toward the door, the other placing a hand discreetly on the small of his boss's back. This is about standards, about a promise of perfection that you have failed to keep. We are leaving. Panic flashed in Mr. Davies's eyes. A walkout by Khalid Al-Jamil wasn't just a bad review. It was a black mark on the ledger of London's elite. It was a story that would be whispered from Knightsbridge to Kensington. It was in this supercharged moment that Chloe Sterling moved. A waitress, not the head waiter, not the sommelier, not the manager, but a simple waitress who was meant to be invisible. 26 years old, with eyes that held a quiet weariness and a grace that came from balancing countless plates and expectations she had been serving the adjacent table. She had heard every word, felt every tremor of the billionaire's rage. She was supposed to clear her table, keep her head down, and let the manager handle the explosion. It was the smart thing to do. The safe thing to do. She had rent to pay and a life that couldn't afford a single ripple, let alone a tsunami like Khalid Al-Jamil. But she had also seen something else. Beneath the volcanic anger, she saw a flicker of profound pain in his eyes. It was a look she recognized. It was the look of a man who wasn't just angry at the world, but wounded by it. She had lived in Riyadh for 10 years as a child. Her father, an engineer on a major urban development project. She hadn't just learned the language. She had absorbed the culture, the nuances, the proverbs, and the deep-seated importance of honor and respect. As Khalid turned to leave his formidable back to the room, Chloe took a small, steadying breath. She stepped forward past the petrified Mr. Davies. Her colleagues stared winged-eyed, certain she was about to be fired in the most spectacular fashion. She did not address his anger about the fish. She did not apologize for the restaurant. She spoke softly, her voice clear and steady in the suffocating silence. She spoke in an Arabic that was not the formal classical language of news anchors, but the warm, nuanced cadence of the Najd region, the very heartland of Saudi Arabia, where his family was from. Al-Karam fil wajh ya Sheikh, she said. Generosity is written on the face, O Sheikh. It was a simple poetic proverb, a phrase one's grandmother might say. It was intimate, respectful, and utterly, shockingly unexpected. Khalid Al-Jamil froze. His entire body went rigid. His hand, which had been gesturing dismissively, stopped mid-air. He didn't turn around immediately. It was as if the words, spoken in a flawless, familiar accent, by a voice he had never heard, had erected an invisible wall in front of him. The sound of a London waitress speaking his mother tongue was improbable. The sound of her speaking it, with the accent of his childhood home, was impossible. His bodyguard looked at him confused. Mr. Davies stared at Chloe as if she had just sprouted wings. The entire restaurant held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, as if resisting a magnetic pull, Khalid Al-Jamil turned around. His furious mask was gone. In its place was a look of profound, absolute astonishment. His dark eyes locked onto Chloe's, and for the first time that night, the billionaire looked utterly and completely silenced. The silence that followed Chloe's words was heavier than the fury that preceded it. Time seemed to warp in the gilded lyre. For Chloe, it felt like an eternity as the full weight of Khalid Al-Jamil's gaze settled upon her. It was an intense, analytical stare, as if he were trying to deconstruct a complex equation. The anger had receded from his eyes, replaced by a piercing curiosity that was in its own way just as intimidating. "Repeat what you said," he commanded. His voice had lost its harsh edge, but it now carried the immense gravity of his full attention. Chloe's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The rational part of her brain was screaming, "What have you done? You've overstepped. You've insulted him. You're fired." But the part of her that remembered dusty afternoons in Riyadh, the kindness of her childhood neighbors, and the deep respect for elders ingrained in her, held her steady. She met his gaze directly, a feat Mr. Davies had failed to accomplish all evening. "I said," she repeated her Arabic, just as fluid and natural as before, "Al-Karam fil waj ya sheikh. Forgive me if I was improper. I only meant that the frustration I saw did not match the face of the man I was looking at." It was a masterful deflection, respectful, and yet deeply personal. She wasn't just translating the proverb. She was explaining her intent, showing that she understood not just the words, but the cultural soul behind them. Khalid's aide, a younger man named Faisal, who had been silent until now, took a half step forward, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Sir," Khalid raised a single commanding hand, silencing him without a glance. He took a step closer to Chloe, ignoring the manager who now seemed to have shrunk into the plush carpeting. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked, his English returning, but now laced with a quiet intensity. "Not from a book, not from a university course in London. I grew up in Riyadh, sir," Chloe answered simply. "My father was an engineer with Bechtel working on the Kingdom Centre project. We lived there for 10 years. The mention of the iconic Riyadh skyscraper, a project he knew intimately, was another small shock. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at a ghost from a past and a place he thought he had left behind in London. He saw a young Englishwoman in a black uniform, but he heard the echo of home. The carefully constructed walls he maintained between his business life in the West and his roots in the East had been unexpectedly breached. He studied her for another long moment. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. She wasn't fawning or intimidated. She was simply present. In a world of sycophants and yes-men, her quiet, direct dignity was as startling as her accent. He made a decision. It was swift, unconventional, and entirely characteristic of the man who built his empire on gut feelings. He turned to the still frozen Mr. Davies. "The fish is forgotten, but my evening is ruined. I will not be staying." He then looked at his entourage. "Faisal, you and the security team wait for me in the car. I wish to speak with this young lady. Alone." Faisal's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. An order like that was unheard of. Khalid al-Jamil did not have private, unscheduled meetings with waitstaff. "Sir, is that wise?" "It is what I have decided." Khalid stated the finality in his tone, leaving no room for argument. His team, ever professional, melted away. The bodyguards were the last to leave, their eyes lingering on Chloe for a second too long, as if trying to assess a threat they couldn't comprehend. Soon the alcove at table 7 was occupied by only 2 people, the billionaire magnate and the waitress who had dared to speak to him. The rest of the restaurant staff, under a sharp glare from Mr. Davies, began to cautiously resume their duties, though the air of normalcy was a fragile facade. Khalid gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit." Chloe hesitated. "Sir, I'm on duty." "You are not," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "For the next 10 minutes, you are my guest." With a feeling of unreality, Chloe sat down at the table she had only ever approached to serve. She smoothed her apron, her hands trembling slightly. "Your name?" he asked. "Chloe. Chloe Sterling." "Chloe Sterling," he repeated, tasting the name. "And you lived in my country. You understand our ways." "I believe so, sir. I was young, but I remember it fondly. The people were very kind to my family." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Today I was dealt a heavy blow, a betrayal in business of the worst kind, by a man I trusted, an Englishman, as it happens." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "My entire legacy project, a solar energy initiative that would power a new city, is in jeopardy. I came here tonight to quiet the noise in my head. Instead, I found more incompetence, more disappointment." Chloe listened, her heart aching with a surprising pang of empathy for this incredibly powerful yet clearly wounded man. She said nothing, sensing that he didn't want platitudes. He wanted to be heard. "What you did," he continued, "was either incredibly foolish or incredibly brave. You saw a storm, and you walked directly into it." "Why?" Chloe thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because the storm wasn't about the fish, sir, and the proverbs I learned as a child. They are about looking past the storm to see the man. I apologize if I presumed too much." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Khalid's lips for the first time. It transformed his severe face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the surface. "You presumed correctly," he said. He sat back, a new idea taking root in his mind, an idea born of desperation and instinct. The man who had betrayed him, his long-time British consultant, had used a deep understanding of Western corporate culture to manipulate the deal, weaving a web of legal and financial complexities that Khalid's own team had failed to anticipate. He had been outmaneuvered not by numbers, but by nuance. Perhaps he thought the solution was to fight fire with fire. He needed a bridge, not just a translator, but someone who understood both worlds from the inside out. Someone who could see what his own people, blinded by their perspective, could not. "Miss Sterling," he began, his tone shifting from personal to professional with breathtaking speed. "This job you have, waiting tables, is it your passion, your life's ambition?" Chloe was taken aback by the question. "No, sir. It pays the bills. I was studying art history, but I had to stop. Family reasons." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Family reasons was a polite euphemism for her father's financial ruin and subsequent disappearance from her life. "I see." Khalid's eyes held a sudden sharp glint of opportunity. "I find myself in need of a consultant, someone with a unique skill set, a fluency not just in language but in culture, both of ours. The work would be demanding. The stakes are higher than you can imagine. But the compensation would ensure you never have to wait another table in your life." Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. Was he offering her a job? A man she'd met 10 minutes ago, a man she had provoked in the middle of a tantrum. It sounded insane. "Sir, I don't understand. What would I be doing?" "You would be listening," Khalid said, standing up. "You would be observing, and you would be telling me what I am missing. You would be my bridge." He pulled a sleek black business card from his jacket. It was heavy, the lettering embossed in simple, elegant silver. "My assistant Faisal will be in contact to arrange a proper meeting. Be at the address on this card tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock sharp." He placed the card on the table between them. It lay there, a stark rectangle of black against the white linen, representing an impossible choice. "I do not make offers twice, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice once again the cool, commanding tone of a CEO. "I hope for your sake you are as brave as you appeared to be a few minutes ago." And with that, Khalid Al-Jamil turned and walked out of the Gilded Lyre, leaving Chloe Sterling sitting alone at his table. The entire restaurant watching her, and a single business card holding the weight of a future she could never have imagined. The address on the business card wasn't an office building. It was for the Corinthia Hotel, and the card specified the Royal Penthouse. Chloe stood before the grand entrance the next morning, feeling as though she were from another planet. Her best black trousers and a simple white blouse, which had felt professional and smart in her small flat in Clapham, now seemed woefully inadequate. The doorman, draped in a magnificent uniform, eyed her with polite suspicion until she uttered the name Al-Jamil. The effect was instantaneous. His posture straightened, and he ushered her inside with a deferential, "Of course, miss. Right this way." She was escorted to a private elevator that whisked her silently to the top floor. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The space was breathtaking, a 2-story cavern of glass, marble, and steel, with a panoramic view that stretched from the London Eye to the BT Tower. The city lay sprawled below them like a detailed map. Faisal Khalid's aide from the restaurant greeted her. Dressed in a razor-sharp suit, he was polite but formal, his eyes giving nothing away. "Miss Sterling, thank you for coming. Mr. Al-Jamil will be with you shortly. Can I offer you some coffee?" "Water." "Water would be lovely, thank you," Chloe said, her voice steadier than she felt. As Faisal attended to the drink, she walked towards the immense floor-to-ceiling windows. London looked so quiet from up here, the frantic energy of its streets reduced to a silent, flowing river of red buses and black cabs. It was a perspective of power, a vantage point from which the world and its problems seemed small and manageable. "It is a beautiful city, but it can also be treacherous." Khalid's voice came from behind her. He had entered so silently she hadn't noticed. He wasn't in a suit, but in a simple yet clearly expensive white linen shirt and dark trousers. He looked rested, the fury of the previous night completely gone, replaced by a calm, focused energy. "It all depends on your vantage point, I suppose," Chloe replied, turning to face him. "Precisely," he said, gesturing for her to sit on one of the plush white sofas. "From down there on the street, one must watch for every threat. The speeding car, the thief, the rival. From up here, one can see everything coming. That is what I am offering you, Miss Sterling. A new vantage point." He sat opposite her as Faisal placed a crystal glass of water on the table. With a nod from his boss, the aide retreated to a discreet distance, leaving them to their conversation. "I will be direct," Khalid began. "The project I mentioned is called the Asyad Project. It is the cornerstone of my country's future energy plans, a network of solar farms in the Rub al-Khali Desert, powering a new smart city. It is my legacy. My partner in this venture was a British consulting firm, Sterling Cross Capital, led by a man named Robert Sterling. I trusted him for 10 years. He advised my company, Al-Jamil Enterprises, on all our Western investments." Chloe's blood ran cold. Sterling. The name hit her like a physical blow. It couldn't be. It was a common name. A coincidence. Her mind raced desperately, trying to dismiss the connection. Her father's name was Robert Sterling. He was a consultant, an engineer turned financier who had worked on international projects. But he had lost everything years ago. He had vanished from her life after a bitter falling out, leaving her and her mother to pick up the pieces. It couldn't be him. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her expression neutral. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a little too tight. He used my trust against me. Khalid said, his voice laced with cold fury. He structured the contracts in such a way that at the last minute he could leverage a series of legal loopholes and environmental clauses he himself recommended we include to stall the project indefinitely. He then used that leverage to attempt a hostile takeover of the entire technology patent portfolio associated with the project. He didn't just want a bigger piece of the pie. He wanted to steal the entire bakery. Khalid stood up and paced in front of the window. My lawyers are good, the best in Riyadh, but they think like Saudis. They do not understand the subtle poison of British corporate law. The old boys' network, the unspoken rules of the game here. Sterling played me perfectly. He used our culture's emphasis on a man's word and honor against me, all while hiding behind a mountain of Western legal jargon. He stopped and turned to face her. That is where you come in. I don't need another lawyer. I need a new perspective. I want to hire you, Miss Sterling. Your official title will be Special Consultant for Cross-Cultural Strategy. You will have access to all the project documents. You will sit in on my meetings with my legal team. Your job is to read, listen, and tell me what they are not seeing. You grew up in my world, but you were born in his. You are the bridge. You can translate not just the language, but the intent. The offer was staggering. The implications were terrifying. If this Robert Sterling was indeed her father, she would be hired to help destroy him. If he wasn't, it was just an unnerving coincidence. But her gut screamed at her. The ambition, the ruthlessness. It sounded exactly like the man she remembered. Why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Based on a proverb and 10 minutes in a restaurant. Do not underestimate those 10 minutes, Khalid said firmly. In those 10 minutes you showed more perception and courage than my entire executive team has shown in the last month. You were not afraid of my anger. You saw the root of the problem. That is a rare skill. I am a man who has built an empire on trusting my instincts, and my instincts tell me you are the key. He named a salary that made Chloe's head spin. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning in a decade, let alone a year. It was enough to pay off her student loans, find a new apartment, and live without the constant grinding fear of financial ruin. It was freedom. But what would it cost her? I need to read the initial contract. She found herself saying the words coming out before she could stop them. And the profile of the man who betrayed you, Robert Sterling. A flicker of respect showed in Khalid's eyes. She wasn't simply dazzled by the money. Of course. Faisal will provide you with a preliminary file and a non-disclosure agreement. You can review it here. Take all the time you need. He motioned to his aide. Faisal approached with a tablet and a slim leather-bound folder. He placed them on the table in front of Chloe. The NDA is standard, Faisal said coolly. What you read in this file is not to leave this room, whether you accept the position or not. Chloe nodded, her hands clammy. She signed the document with a pen that felt heavier than a brick. Then, with a deep, trembling breath, she opened the tablet. The first document was a corporate profile of Sterling Cross Capital, and there on the screen was a professional headshot. Her world tilted on its axis. The face was older, the dark hair now streaked with grey at the temples, the lines around the eyes deeper. But it was him. It was unmistakably her father, Robert Sterling. The same confident, calculating smile that had always seemed to hide more than it revealed. The man who had promised her the world and then disappeared when his own came crashing down. He hadn't lost everything. He had reinvented himself. He had risen higher than ever before, and in his ascent, he had tried to ruin Khalid al-Jamil. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. She looked up from the screen, her eyes wide with a secret terror, and met Khalid's intense, expectant gaze. He was offering her a golden key to a new life. But to use it, she would have to help him lock the door on her own father's world, and she had no idea what monsters lay on either side. For a long moment, Chloe couldn't breathe. The air in the penthouse, once filled with the promise of opportunity, now felt thin and suffocating. The face on the screen was a spectre from a life she had tried to bury. Her father, the man whose absence had been a defining feature of her young adulthood. The man whose last words to her during a bitter phone call after he lost their family home were, "You have to be a predator in this world, Chloe, or you become prey. I just chose the wrong hunt." It seemed he had found a new one. "Is something wrong, Miss Sterling?" Khalid's voice cut through her paralysis. He had noticed the change in her, the sudden pallor of her skin, the way her hand trembled slightly as it rested on the tablet. Chloe's mind raced a chaotic whirlwind of panic and preservation. Tell him right now. He's my father." "I can't do this." The words formed in her throat, but died before they could escape. What would he do? Would he throw her out, disgusted by the association? Would he suspect her of being a spy, of being in league with her father? The life-altering opportunity would vanish, and she would be left with nothing but a dangerous secret. Another voice, colder and more calculating, a voice that sounded disturbingly like her father's, whispered a different path. "Say nothing. You owe him nothing. He abandoned you. This man Khalid is offering you a way out. Use it. Use what you know." She forced her expression into a mask of professional focus, a skill she'd honed over years of dealing with difficult customers. "No, sir. Nothing is wrong." She lied, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "I'm just absorbing the scale of the betrayal. It's audacious." Khalid nodded, accepting her explanation. "Audacious is one word for it. Now you see why I need a different kind of weapon in this war." "I accept your offer," Chloe said, the decision solidifying even as it terrified her. She was stepping off a cliff, not knowing if she would fly or fall. A look of satisfaction settled on Khalid's features. "Excellent. Faisal will handle the formalities of your contract and accommodations. You will have a suite here at the hotel. You start immediately. I want you to read everything, every email, every contract, every addendum. I want you to live inside this project until you know it better than I do." The next few days were a blur. Chloe was plunged into the heart of Al-Jamil Enterprises' London operation. Her life in the cramped Clapham flat became a distant memory, replaced by the opulent, sterile silence of her hotel suite. Days were spent in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by Khalid's legal team, a group of sharp, serious men who initially viewed her with thinly veiled skepticism. She was the waitress consultant, an eccentric whim of their boss. Chloe said little in those first meetings. She listened. She absorbed the complex language of international finance and contract law, and she read. She devoured thousands of pages of documents, her past study of art history, the discipline of finding meaning in details, of understanding context and provenance, giving her a unique lens. But she wasn't just reading legal text. She was reading her father. In the precise, predatory wording of the clauses he had drafted, she recognized his voice. She saw his ambition, his meticulous planning, his utter ruthlessness. He had always been a brilliant strategist, a grand master of chess who saw people as pieces on a board. She remembered him teaching her the game as a child, his constant refrain being, "Think 10 moves ahead. Chloe, always control the center." In these contracts, she could see him controlling the center, laying traps months, even years in advance. She began to see the patterns his Saudi legal team had missed, not because they weren't smart, but because they didn't know the man. They saw a business adversary. Chloe saw a ghost. One evening, buried under a mountain of files in her suite, she found it. It was a sub-clause in an environmental impact assessment report attached to an appendix that was hundreds of pages long. It seemed innocuous. It stipulated that any discovery of potential archaeological significance on the proposed construction site would trigger an immediate and indefinite project halt, pending a full investigation by a UNESCO-affiliated panel. Khalid's team had dismissed it as standard boilerplate. But Chloe knew her father. He was not a man who cared for history or archaeology. He only cared for leverage. She cross-referenced the coordinates of the proposed solar farm site with geological and historical survey maps. It took hours, but she found what she was looking for, a series of old academic papers speculating about the location of a lost city of the Ubar civilization, the so-called Atlantis of the Sands. The speculated location was right on the edge of Khalid's proposed site. It was a long shot, a fringe theory, but it was enough. Her father hadn't just relied on legal loopholes. He had planted a cultural bomb, a trigger that would mire the project in an international heritage dispute, a public relations nightmare that the Saudi government would be desperate to avoid. He would use the delay to bleed Khalid dry and seize the patents. It was brilliant, it was diabolical, and it was pure Robert Sterling. At that moment, she felt a profound sense of cold clarity. She was not helping a stranger against another stranger. She was caught in a war between two titans, one of whom was her own flesh and blood. And she was the only person in the world who understood the enemy's strategy. The next morning, she walked into the conference room and interrupted the lead counsel mid-sentence. "You're looking in the wrong place," she said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the legal jargon. All eyes turned to her. The skepticism was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity. She walked to the head of the table where Khalid was sitting, his face an impassive mask. She placed the archaeological survey map next to the environmental impact report. "Mr. Al-Jamil," she began, "your problem isn't in the financial contracts. It's buried in the sand." She proceeded to lay out her discovery, connecting the obscure clause to the academic theories explaining the cultural and political leverage it would give her father. She spoke of his methods, his way of thinking, not revealing how she knew, but presenting it as a logical analysis. "This man doesn't fight on one front," she explained. "He creates a multi-front war. He attacks your finances, your legal standing, and your reputation all at once. You've been focused on the legal and financial battle, but the reputational attack is the one he will use to deliver the killing blow." As she spoke, the atmosphere in the room changed. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Faisal stared at her, his professional reserve finally cracking to reveal a look of sheer astonishment. Khalid remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, listening to every word. When she finished, a long silence hung in the air. He finally looked away from her and at his lead counsel. "Did any of you see this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The lawyer, a proud and decorated man, could only stammer, "No, sir. We considered it a negligible risk." "A negligible risk," Khalid repeated flatly. He turned his gaze back to Chloe, and for the first time she saw something more than curiosity in his eyes. It was a deep, profound respect. "You have just saved us months of time and millions of dollars, Miss Sterling." He stood up. "The old strategy is dead. From now on, we follow a new one. We will listen to Miss Sterling." In that moment, Chloe was no longer the waitress consultant. She was the lead strategist in a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. And her primary weapon was the intimate, painful knowledge of the man she was trying to destroy her own father. The balance of power in Khalid al-Jamil's inner circle shifted overnight. Chloe was no longer a peripheral figure. She was at the epicenter. Khalid moved her from the conference room to his private office in the penthouse where they worked side by side, often late into the night, poring over maps, financial projections, and psychological profiles of the key players at Sterling Cross Capital. It was a strange, intense intimacy. Chloe learned the rhythms of his day, the strong, unsweetened coffee he drank at dawn, the way he would fall silent and stare out at the city, when deep in thought the faint scent of oud that clung to his clothes. He in turn began to rely on her for more than just strategy. He started to ask for her opinion on other matters, valuing her clear, unvarnished perspective. He opened up to her in small, unguarded moments. He spoke of his late wife, Layla, who had died years ago. He described her as the anchor of his life, and confessed that since her passing, his work had become a fortress to keep the grief at bay. He spoke of his vision for the Asiad project, not as a source of profit, but as a promise to her a way to build a better future. She believed that power was a responsibility, not a privilege, he told Chloe one evening, as they watched the city lights ignite below them. She would have despised a man like Robert Sterling, who uses his brilliance only to acquire, never to build. Every word was a small dagger in Chloe's heart. The guilt was a constant, heavy cloak. She was earning this man's trust, his respect, even his friendship, all while harboring a monumental secret. She was using the memories of her childhood, the games of chess, the overheard conversations, the understanding of her father's psychology as weapons in this corporate war. Her insights were devastatingly effective. "My father, I mean Sterling," she corrected herself quickly, her heart skipping a beat, "is a narcissist. He needs to be the smartest man in the room. He will have planned for you to fight back legally. He wants that. It's a battle he knows how to win. What he won't expect is for you to ignore him." "Ignore him?" Khalid asked, intrigued. "He is holding my legacy hostage." "Don't fight him on the UNESCO clause," Chloe advised. "Embrace it. Announce publicly that in light of potential archaeological sensitivities identified by your own due diligence, your diligence not his, you are proactively funding a state-of-the-art archaeological survey of the region. Frame it as Al-Jamil Enterprises being a custodian of national heritage. You'll be praised for it. You'll take his weapon and turn it into a shield. He can't use a threat that you've already neutralized and turned into good publicity." Khalid was stunned by the audacity of the plan. It was counterintuitive, expensive, and brilliant. He put the plan into motion. The press release was picked up by international news agencies. Khalid was lauded for his corporate responsibility. In a single move, Robert Sterling's hidden leverage was rendered useless. Chloe's next insight was even more personal. He surrounds himself with people who are competent, but not as smart as he is. His second-in-command, a man named David Chen. My father would have cultivated a sense of dependency in him. Chen is likely the one doing the real work, but Sterling takes the credit. If you put enough pressure on the company, Sterling will sacrifice Chen to save himself. Acting on this Khalid's legal team, initiated a targeted legal action aimed directly at the division. Chen managed citing specific contractual irregularities Chloe had identified. The pressure was immense. As Chloe predicted, Sterling Cross Capital began to show cracks. Robert Sterling was being outmaneuvered, and he couldn't understand how. Khalid Al-Jamil, who he had seen as a straightforward, if powerful foreign businessman, was suddenly playing corporate chess with the skill of a grandmaster. The moves were subtle, creative, and seemed to anticipate his own strategy before he even enacted it. He felt like he was fighting a shadow, someone who knew his playbook page by page. He grew paranoid, suspicious of everyone on his team. For Chloe, the success was terrifying. She lived on a razor's edge. A single slip of the tongue referring to Sterling as "my father," revealing a detail she couldn't possibly know from the documents alone, would bring everything crashing down. The stress was immense. She had nightmares of Khalid's warm respect turning to cold fury. The same fury she had witnessed in the restaurant, but this time directed at her. One afternoon, Khalid found her staring blankly at a spreadsheet, her face pale and drawn. "You are carrying a heavy burden, Chloe," he said gently, his voice startling her. He had started using her first name in their private meetings. "The work is demanding," she deflected. "It is more than that," he insisted, his dark eyes searching her face. "I have asked you to walk into the mind of a very dark man. It is taking its toll. Perhaps we should take a break this evening. There is a private concert at the Barbican Center. A friend of mine is conducting. It would be good for you to see something beautiful after staring at so much ugliness." The offer was personal, a clear line being crossed from a purely professional relationship. Part of her, the lonely young woman who hadn't had a real friend in years, desperately wanted to accept. But the other part, the part that housed her terrible secret, screamed that it was a mistake. Getting closer to Khalid only made her deception more profound, more painful. "I can't," she said more abruptly than she intended. "I need to finish reviewing these investment portfolios." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he masked it quickly. "As you wish. Do not work too late." He left the office, and Chloe buried her face in her hands. The isolation was crushing her. She was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams, but she was utterly terrifyingly alone, trapped between a past she couldn't escape and a future built on a lie. She was winning a war for a man she admired by betraying the blood of a man she despised, and she was starting to lose herself in the process. The razor's edge was cutting deeper every day. Robert Sterling was a man cornered, and cornered men are dangerous. His meticulously planned corporate assault on Khalid Al-Jamil was not just failing. It was being systematically dismantled with an unnerving prescience. Every strategy was anticipated, every trap disarmed. It felt as if his opponent could read his mind, and the sensation was maddening. Consumed by a gnawing paranoia, he did what he always did when threatened. He gathered intelligence. He hired a discreet private investigator, tasking him with one simple objective: identify the brain behind Al-Jamil's new strategy. The report that landed on his desk was thin, but its contents were explosive. It contained surveillance photos of Khalid's inner circle, and one face stood out. It was a young woman, identified as a new consultant named Chloe Sterling, whose previous job was listed as a waitress. Robert stared at the grainy photo of his daughter's face, and the world tilted on its axis. Chloe. It was impossible. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since his own financial ruin had shattered their family. And now she was here, allied with his enemy, the architect of his downfall. The betrayal felt absolute, a dagger forged from his own blood. He didn't wait. 2 evenings later, as Chloe stepped out of the Corinthia Hotel for a breath of crisp night air, a black sedan slid silently to the curb. The tinted rear window glided down, revealing the face she hadn't seen outside of her nightmares. "Get in the car, Chloe," Robert Sterling said. His voice was unnaturally calm, which made it all the more menacing. She froze, her heart seizing in her chest. "I have nothing to say to you." She turned to retreat into the safety of the hotel. "If you walk away," he called after her, his voice rising slightly, "I will have this conversation in the hotel lobby. I am certain Mr. Al-Jamil would be fascinated to learn the true identity of his brilliant new consultant." It was a perfect trap. He had always known how to corner her. Defeated, she opened the car door and slid inside. The opulent leather interior felt suffocating, filled with the scent of his cologne and years of unspoken resentment. The car pulled silently into the stream of London traffic. "How could you?" He began, his voice a low hiss of fury. "My own daughter, conspiring with him against me. Tell me, what was the price for your loyalty? How much did he pay you to forget your own name?" A surge of long-suppressed anger burned away her fear. "You want to talk about loyalty?" She shot back, her voice trembling but strong. "You who vanished when your own risks blew up in your face, you who left us to pick up the pieces of the life you broke, you don't get to use the words family or loyalty with me. You surrendered that right years ago." The truth of her words hit him, but he deflected his tactics, shifting instantly from aggression to manipulation. The anger in his face was replaced by a mask of paternal concern she knew all too well. He reached across the seat and placed a hand on hers. She flinched. "Chloe, listen," he said, his voice now soft and persuasive. "That was a mistake, and I've paid for it. But this is our chance to get it all back. We're the same, you and I. We're survivors. This Al-Jamil is just using you for your insight. When he's done, he'll discard you. But you are my blood. We can win this together. Just tell me his next move. That's all I need. Everything I gain, half of it, will be yours. A real legacy for our family." It was the same hollow promise he had always made, a kingdom built on a foundation of sand. She looked at his desperate eyes and saw not a father, but a frightened man terrified of losing. In that moment, a profound and sorrowful clarity washed over her. The guilt and fear she had carried for weeks vanished. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled her hand from beneath his. "The difference between us," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is that you think winning is all that matters. I've learned that how you win is what defines you." She turned to the driver. "Stop the car." Robert stared at her, disbelief warring with rage. He had played his final card, and it had failed. "You're a fool," he snarled, the mask of charm gone completely. "You're choosing him over your own father." "No," Chloe replied, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "I'm choosing myself." She opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. She didn't look back as the black car sped away, disappearing into the river of taillights. The confrontation she had dreaded had come, and it had not broken her. It had set her free. She turned and began the walk back to the hotel, her purpose clear. The game was over. It was time to tell Khalid everything. Chloe walked back into the Corinthia, not with the fear of an employee, but with the quiet resolve of a woman who had made her choice. She found Khalid in his penthouse office, a dark silhouette against the vast glittering expanse of the London skyline. He turned as she entered, a welcoming smile on his face that quickly faded as he registered her solemn expression. "Chloe, what has happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I have to tell you the truth." She began, her voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. "Something I should have told you the day we met. Please just hear all of it." He gestured to a chair, his full undivided attention on her. As they sat opposite each other, the truth spilled out. "Robert Sterling is my father," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. She explained everything. The painful estrangement after his financial collapse, the shock of seeing his face in the file, and the lie of omission she had maintained out of fear and a desperate desire for the opportunity he was offering. She recounted every detail of the confrontation that had just occurred, her father's manipulative plea for her to betray Khalid, and her absolute refusal. When she finished, she looked him in the eye, fully prepared for the explosion of rage she had once witnessed. Khalid remained silent for a long moment, his gaze intense and analytical. He was processing every word, re-evaluating every interaction, every brilliant insight she'd had. He wasn't seeing a deceiver, but a woman who had been walking a razor's edge, fighting a war, both for him and within herself. "You deceived me," he finally said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. Her heart sank. "You placed my entire legacy at risk by hiding this connection. By all rights, I should end your employment this instant." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "However," he continued, his tone shifting when faced with an ultimate test, a choice between blood and honor, "you chose honor. Your father came to you to betray me, and instead you have come to me to betray his secret. In doing so, you have not lost my trust. You have finally and completely earned it." A wave of relief so profound it left Chloe light-headed, washed over her. The heavy cloak of her secret had finally been lifted. "He is desperate and blind," Khalid stated, standing up, his energy now focused and formidable. "It is time to end this. Together." The final move was not a direct financial assault, but an elegant trap designed by Chloe to prey on the one vulnerability she knew her father could not control: his own ego. Instead of attacking his company, they laid a trail of sophisticated false information. The breadcrumbs leaked through trusted channels hinted at a critical weakness in Al Jamil Enterprises' financial structure, a golden opportunity for a hostile takeover, an opportunity too perfect for a narcissist like Robert to resist. Blinded by arrogance and his desperate need for a final victory, Robert Sterling took the bait. He poured all of his company's liquid capital and took on immense loans to launch his attack, believing he was about to seize the crown from a wounded king. The trap was sprung in the sterile quiet of a Mayfair boardroom at a meeting Robert himself had called to announce his triumph. Instead of a broken Khalid, he was met by Khalid Chloe and a team of forensic accountants. They calmly revealed that the weakness was a fiction and that his buyout attempt was based on manufactured premises. In the same breath, Khalid revealed his checkmate move. While Robert was busy chasing ghosts, Khalid had quietly purchased all of his company's outstanding debt. In a single brilliant stroke, Robert Sterling was ruined. He hadn't just lost the deal, he had lost everything. He was financially and professionally destroyed, a predator caught in a snare he never saw. He stared across the polished table, his face ashen first at the implacable gaze of Khalid, and then at his daughter. Chloe met his eyes not with triumph, but with a quiet, sorrowful finality. That moment marked the end of one life for Chloe, and the true beginning of another. In the months that followed, as the new director of Western strategy for Al Jamil Enterprises, she oversaw the triumphant relaunch of the Asiad project. Her relationship with Khalid had evolved into a powerful and respectful partnership, forged in crisis and solidified by trust. She was no longer the invisible waitress or the daughter of a disgraced man. She was a woman who had faced down her past, chosen her own code of honor, and built a future she had earned, not inherited. Chloe's story reminds us that the most powerful people aren't always the ones with the most money or the loudest voice. Sometimes it's the person who listens, the person who sees beyond the surface, the person who holds on to their integrity when it would be easier to let it go. She started as a waitress, invisible to the world, but by using her unique past and her inner strength, she changed her own destiny and the future of a billion-dollar legacy. Her story is a testament to the fact that your circumstances don't define you, your choices do. Even in your darkest moments, a single act of courage, a single moment of truth can change everything. If this story of courage, secrets, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about the incredible moments that change lives forever. Thank you for listening.